For the Rishi could foresee that only the Supreme Personality of Godhead could save his boy from his sinful act. He therefore directly prayed for pardon from the Supreme Lord, who alone can undo a thing which is impossible to change. The appeal was made in the name of a foolish boy who had developed no intelligence at all. A question may be raised herein that since it was the desire of the Lord that Parikshit Maharaj be put into that awkward position so that he might be delivered from material existence, then why was a Brahmana's son made responsible for this offensive act? The answer is that the offensive act was performed by a child only so that he could be excused very easily, and thus the prayer of the father was accepted. But if the question is raised why the Brahmana community as a whole was made responsible for allowing Kali into the world affairs, the answer is given in the Varaha Purana, that the demons who acted inimically toward the personality of Godhead, but were not killed by the Lord, were allowed to take birth in the families of Brahmanas to take advantage of the age of Kali. The all-merciful Lord gave them a chance to have their births in families of the pious Brahmanas so that they could progress towards salvation. But the demons, instead of utilizing the good opportunity, misused the Brahminical culture due to being puffed up by vanity in becoming Brahmanas. The typical example is the son of Shamika Rishi, and all the foolish sons of Brahmanas are warned hereby not to become as foolish as Shringi, and to be always on guard against the demoniac qualities which they had in their previous births. The foolish boy was, of course, excused by the Lord, but others who may not have a father, like Shamika Rishi, will be put into great difficulty if they misuse the advantages obtained by birth in a Brahmana family. The translation again. Then the Rishi prayed to the all-pervading personality of Godhead to pardon his immature boy who had no intelligence and who had committed the great sin of cursing a person who was completely free from all sins, who was subordinate, and who deserved to be protected. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunya Vadi Paschatya Deshatare Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananyana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpaturvyas Chakrapa Sindhubhya Eva Chapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, an interesting thing that Srila Prabhupada brought out in this purport toward the end, when he's talking about the Brahmana community as a whole being implicated for the reason why Kali here exists. And so it was pointed out that in the Varaha Purana, it mentions that those demons who were inimical to Krishna in previous births or previous settings were given the opportunity to take birth as Brahmanas in the age of Kali. And one might think, well, that's kind of strange because, if they're demoniac and usually your consciousness at the time of death determines your next birth, why would they get such nice births as Brahmanas? So we know that when Krishna kills a demon who's inimical to him, they actually get liberation. But when one's just inimical to him, but they don't get killed by Krishna, they don't get liberation, but they still get the benefit that they were actually meditating on Krishna, not in a favorable way, but they were meditating on Krishna. They're always thinking of Krishna, and that's why they were so inimical toward him. And so they're able to get this pious birth, but it's in Kali Yuga, so it can go either way. In other words, they'll have the opportunity to take advantage of this Brahminical birth because they had that previous association with Krishna, even though it was unfavorable. But since it's Kali Yuga, they also might misuse that opportunity if they do not change their demonic tendencies. So today, I actually want to bring it back to the basics a little bit. We're going to talk about the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the divine and demoniac natures. It's important for us to understand this because even though we have come in contact with Srila Prabhupada's mission, and even though many of us, most of us on here have taken lifelong vows, and we have a commitment to Srila Prabhupada's movement, we still have some tendencies due to our conditioning that aren't actually in line with Shastra. And so we have to be very aware of this, because if we don't first identify it and then rectify it, then we're falling in this similar category as Shringi, actually worse. Because as Srila Prabhupada points out, if the mistake is made and we don't have a kind father or mentor, teacher as Shamika Rishi, who begs forgiveness for our immaturity, then we may not be so lucky to be pardoned in the same way that Shringi was pardoned. So I find it interesting in the 16th chapter how, when Krishna is talking about the divine and demonic natures, it's actually, he makes it quite clear what distinguishes the difference between the two. There's only one determining factor. And so I won't say it, I'll let Krishna and Srila Prabhupada say it. I'll just read some translations and some purports. But it becomes clear through that chapter, the 16th chapter of Gita, how we are to act in order to make sure we're following the divine nature and not the demonic. So the first thing I'll read is just the summary of chapter 16, the little blurb that happens before the texts start. And that is this: those who possess demoniac qualities and who live whimsically without following the regulations of Scripture attain lower births and further material bondage. But those who possess divine qualities and regulated lives, abiding by scriptural authority, gradually attain spiritual perfection. Right. So just from the chapter summary, we understand that if you follow the regulations of the Shastra, then it's divine and you will gradually attain spiritual perfection. If you act whimsically, not following the scriptures of the regulations in the scriptures, further and further down, the bondage continues, lower births. And so we see the cause, the activity, and the results that happen from these different natures. And it's all about whether one understands Shastra or not, whether one's acting whimsically or one's acting according to the will of the Supreme Lord. Then in texts 1 through 3, Sri Krishna lists some transcendental qualities, the qualities that belong to the divine. And so they are fearlessness. So we should pay attention to this list, because if we don't have these qualities naturally occurring within us, we can understand that we have to focus more on becoming a proper Vaishnava. Then, in other words, we don't focus on developing these qualities, but if these qualities aren't within us, then we have to focus more on putting Krishna in the center, so that we're acting in such a way that these qualities naturally manifest. Srimad Bhagavatam 5.18.12 mentions that all of the qualities of the Devatas automatically become manifest in one who is practicing devotional service. So here's this list, so we should pay attention. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, fearlessness. Oh, here we are. Thank you. Fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity,
where to get the cats,
self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, austerity, simplicity, nonviolence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault finding. compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, and freedom from envy, from the passion for honor. These transcendental qualities, O son of Partha, belong to godly men endowed with divine nature. So I don't know about any of you, but when I read through this list, it doesn't seem, I mean, it seems familiar in the sense that I've known some people with these qualities, but not in the sense that I actually have these. So in the purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada mentions that in this 16th chapter, the Lord explains both the transcendental nature and its attendant qualities, and the demoniac nature and its qualities. He also explains the advantages and disadvantages of these qualities. So that's what this chapter is all about. It's all about what these qualities are, what the advantages and the disadvantages are, and then what the results are if one is controlled by these particular qualities, or possesses these particular qualities. Later on, Srila Prabhupada continues, the entire Varnashrama Dharma society is meant for tapasya. So there's this list of qualities, and then one by one, Srila Prabhupada mentions, he gives a full explanation of what these qualities are. So I'm just going to skip through a few of these. So this is when he's talking about tapasya. So the entire Varnashrama Dharma society is meant for tapasya. Without tapasya or austerity, no human being can get liberation. The theory that there is no need of austerity in life, that one can go on speculating and everything will be nice, is recommended neither in the Vedic literature nor in the Bhagavad Gita. Such theories are manufactured by show-bottled spiritualists who are trying to gather more followers. If there are restrictions, rules, and regulations, people will not become attracted. Therefore, those who want followers in the name of religion just to have a show only don't restrict the lives of their students nor their own lives. But that method is not approved by the Vedas. So this is an important thing that we have to understand, that austerity, it's not optional. Austerity is absolutely necessary. Because what austerity means is we have a conditioned nature. And if we just follow that conditioned nature, we will act according to our whim, according to our own personal desires, right? But if we understand how we're actually meant to act according to the Vedas, the way that Krishna presents to us, the way that we're meant to act in various circumstances and situations, then that means we are performing austerities, means we're not acting according to our whim, we're actually acting according to expert guidance, authorized guidance from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So this is called tapasya, or austerity, because we're acting against our conditioned nature and acting for the purpose of Krishna consciousness. So without this, without making that change in consciousness, and without performing that austerity of leaving behind the things we think we knew due to our conditioning, and accepting the things that we actually can know because they're given by an authorized source, not just from our previous personal experiences or mundane logic, but they're actually coming from the Supreme Lord. All the Vedic scriptures are apaurushaya, they're infallible, because they are the words of Krishna. They're not based on whim, they're actually based on authority. So this is why austerity, rules, regulations, they're extremely important. Not just important, but they're mandatory, as Srila Prabhupada is pointing out here. Then next, Srila Prabhupada continues. He talks about satyam. This word means that one should not distort the truth for some personal interest. In Vedic literature, there are some difficult passages, but the meaning or the purpose should be learned from a bona fide spiritual master. That is the process for understanding the Vedas. So that's satyam, truth. So it's not that if we find something in the Vedas that seems difficult to understand, that we just either dismiss it or make up our own explanation to try to bring it in line with what our current view of the world is. But we have to learn from a bona fide spiritual master how we are to actually understand these parts of the Shastra. So we shouldn't distort. Let's see, does not distort. Oh, yeah. Should not distort the truth for some personal interest, right? So the proper meaning should be learned from a bona fide spiritual master, and then that's how we understand it. We don't just go through and pick and try to whimsically come up with our own interpretations of what the Vedas is trying to say. We actually get it through a bona fide spiritual master. Then Krishna next says, so Krishna first in text 1 through 3, he gave the divine qualities, and then in text 4, he starts giving the demoniac qualities. So pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. These qualities belong to those of demoniac nature, O son of Pritha. In his purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada writes, in this verse, the royal road to hell is described. The demoniac want to make a show of religion and advancement in spiritual science, although they do not follow the principles. They're always arrogant or proud in possessing some type of education or so much wealth. They desire to be worshipped by others and demand respectability, although they do not command respect. Over trifles, they become very angry and speak harshly, not gently. They do not know what should be done and what should not be done. They do everything whimsically according to their own desire, and they do not recognize any authority. So this last bit here, over trifles, they become very angry and speak harshly, not gently. This is, that whole last part is perfectly describing the situation with Shringi. There was a situation that he misunderstood, but it was really not a major deal. But he spoke harshly. He didn't speak gently. Then they do not know what is to be done and what should not be done. So he acted not according to the Vedas. They do everything whimsically, according to their own desire, and they do not recognize any authority. Although he recognized that Krishna is the authority, he said, now Krishna is gone. He's no longer here in this world. And so now I'm going to take this matter into my own hands. Behold my power. Watch, I will curse him, like this. So we see that this nature was there in Shringi because he wasn't following Shastra. He was acting whimsically without regard for the authority. Then text 5. The transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas the demoniac qualities make for bondage. So we've read what the qualities were, and now we see what the results are. So if one has these transcendental qualities, then that's conducive for liberation. It doesn't mean you will become liberation, but it's conducive. It means if the transcendental qualities are then utilized properly, then instead of going to the heavenly planets, you can actually become liberated. Whereas the demoniac qualities make for bondage. So anytime we act whimsically instead of according to Shastra, then it's just further bondage because the consciousness isn't proper. We're not being Krishna conscious, we're being self-conscious. Then in his purport to verse 6, Srila Prabhupada writes, those who are born with the divine qualities follow a regulated life. That is to say, they abide by the injunctions in scriptures and by the authorities. One should perform duties in the light of authoritative scripture. This mentality is called divine. One who does not follow the regulative principles as they are laid down in the scriptures and who acts according to his whim is called demoniac or asuric. This next sentence is very important. There is no other criterion but obedience to the regulative principles of scriptures. So this is the only criterion which determines whether we are divine or demoniac? Are we acting according to Shastra, which is Krishna's will, or are we acting according to our own whim, which is our will, God-centric, self-centric? It's a very simple principle. Srila Prabhupada continues, it is mentioned in the Vedic literature that both the demigods and the demons are born from the Prajapati. The only difference is that one class obeys the Vedic injunctions and the other does not. So this point, also very important, is that, actually I'll continue before I get to that maybe. Yeah, I'll continue some more reading and then we'll bring all that into context. So then the purport of verse 7, Srila Prabhupada writes, the demons do not know the scriptural rules, nor do they have any inclination to follow them. Most of them do not know them, and even if some know them, and even if some of them know, they have not the tendency to follow them. They have no faith, nor are they willing to act in terms of Vedic injunctions. Then in the purport to verse 10, induced by pride and false prestige, they create some principles of religion which are not approved by the Vedic injunctions. Although such demoniac persons are most abominable in the world, by artificial means, the world creates a false honor for them. Although they are gliding toward hell, they consider themselves very much advanced. So here I actually do want to point out, as we're reading through these, we see that it's not always cut and dry. When we think of the terms demon and devotee, we tend to see them as quite separate and quite obvious, right? But here we're finding that the demoniac, they'll actually sometimes appear as religious leaders, as preachers, as spiritual practitioners. But the way to determine whether these religious practitioners are actually divine or demonic is if they're acting and preaching according to Shastra instead of according to their whim. So this is what's being pointed out here. Because otherwise, as represented by the story of Krishna killing Putana, there are many pseudo-gurus out there, and this is the first anartha that we encounter, that we have to deal with. And the way we have to deal with that is with intelligence and discrimination. We have to determine whether what the spiritual master is saying is actually in line with the Shastra. Now, that's a difficult statement to make because we understand Shastra through the spiritual master, but we also have to be able to understand Shastra enough to understand if where we're getting our information from is actually in line with that. So that's something that takes a bit of time to actually understand, but it's something that we have to all deal with. Then in the purport to verse 17, Srila Prabhupada writes, thinking themselves all in all, not caring for any authority or scripture, the demoniac sometimes perform so-called religious or sacrificial rites. And since they do not believe in authority, they are very impudent. This is due to illusion caused by accumulating some wealth and false prestige. Sometimes such demons take up the role of a preacher, mislead the people, and become known as religious reformers or as incarnations of God, right? So we've seen this also in the past, is that someone will come up with their own ideas of what they think religion is, right? And the people will agree with them because basically what they're doing is they're giving others an easy way out, that they can actually belong to a religion that doesn't actually follow the rules, right? This is what most materialists want. They want to still enjoy materially, but still feel good about themselves for being part of a transcendental movement. They want to feel that they're doing the right thing, but they don't actually want to do the right thing. So when one of these pseudo gurus comes in and starts making rules according to their own whims, they agree. They say, yes, that makes a whole lot of sense. Let's follow that, right? As long as I don't have to give up all the things that I hold dear, right? And so we see this going on. Srila Prabhupada continues in his purport. They make a show of performing sacrifices, or they worship the demigods, or manufacture their own god, right? Common men advertise them as God and worship them, and by the foolish they are considered advanced in the principles of religion or in the principles of spiritual knowledge. Then, in the purport to text 22, the man who has escaped these three gates of hell, referring to lust, anger, and greed from the previous verse, O son of Kunti, performs acts conducive to self-realization and thus gradually attains the supreme destination. So then we're talking about the acts, the activities. So those who are divine, first he has to escape lust, anger, and greed. Then he will perform acts conducive to self-realization and gradually attain the supreme destination. In that purport to text 22, Srila Prabhupada writes, one should be very careful of these three enemies to human life, lust, anger, and greed. The more a person is freed from lust, anger, and greed, the more his existence becomes pure. Then he can follow the rules and regulations enjoined in the Vedic literature. By following the regulative principles of human life, by following the regulative principles of human life, one gradually raises himself to the platform of spiritual realization, right? So just becoming free from lust, anger, and greed, that's the beginning. That's the very beginning. Then we can start engaging in the rules and regulations enjoined in the Vedic literatures. And then by doing that, gradually one raises oneself to the platform of spiritual realization. Then text 23, he who disregards scriptural injunctions and acts according to his own whims attains neither perfection, nor happiness, nor the supreme destination. Again, it's being emphasized the importance of Shastra. This is, as Srila Prabhupada mentioned, the only determining factor of whether one is divine or demonic. If one is acting according to one's whim, then that's demonic. If one is acting according to Krishna, as mentioned in the Shastra, then that's divine. In his purport to verse 23, Srila Prabhupada writes, as described before, the Shastra Vidhi, or the direction of the Shastra, is given to the different castes and orders of human society. Everyone is expected to follow these rules and regulations. If one does not follow them and acts whimsically according to his lust, greed, and desire, then he will never be perfect in his life. In other words, a man may theoretically know all these things, but if he does not apply them in his own life, then he is to be known as the lowest of mankind. I'm going to read that last part again because it's very important, and we might understand that actually this is talking about us. A man may theoretically know all these things, referring to what's given in Shastra. But if he does not apply them in his own life, then he is to be known as the lowest of mankind. So, yeah, then we'll continue. So then text 24. One should therefore understand what is duty and what is not duty by the regulations of the scriptures. Again, not by whim. Knowing such rules and regulations, one should act so that he may be gradually elevated. And then finally, in the purport to 24, Srila Prabhupada writes, without following the principles of the scriptures, one cannot elevate himself to the perfectional stage. One who actually, therefore, understands the purport of the Shastras is considered fortunate. So we see that theme throughout that 16th chapter. As Srila Prabhupada repeatedly says, as even Sri Krishna himself is repeatedly saying in the verses, the determining factor whether we are divine or demonic is whether we are following Shastra or we are acting according to whim. So as I mentioned before, the divine and demonic these days are rarely absolute. Someone's not either absolutely a demon or absolutely divine. There are some cases where we will see a demonic person who will just reject Shastric authority wholesale. They'll say, I don't accept anything in Shastra, right? So we find that it's not common, but there are some people that are just straight up, obviously demoniac. And there are some very rare, very, very rare examples of divine people who base every thought, every word, and every action on Shastric authority, right? So those are both rare cases, the second one even more rare. But for the most part, the majority of people are in various shades of gray with various unique mixtures of both divine and demoniac qualities, right? And I think we can all observe this within ourselves, within society at large. We see that some people have some good qualities, but in other areas, they do not. So we can see that we personally have a mixture of divine and demonic qualities in ourselves. We don't always have the tendency or even the knowledge to know how to follow the Shastras, right? So not only do we maybe not always have the tendency, but we don't even have the knowledge a lot of the time of how exactly we're supposed to act according to Shastra, right? Because we're not quite expert enough in determining according to Shastra how we are to act, right? And therefore, because we don't have this Shastric backing for our thoughts, words, and actions, there's no other option but to fall back on acting on our own whim. So if we don't know what Krishna wants us to do, which is given in Shastra, also given by the Guru and the Sadhus, then we're just going to act according to whim. That's our default conditioned setting. So clearly there's a mix that we have, both divine and demonic within ourselves. So sometimes we act according to Sri Krishna's will, and sometimes we act according to our own will, right? So what we have to do about that is we have to develop the intelligence based on Shastra to determine where we are acting in disconnect to the Shastra and gradually bring ourselves in line with Sri Krishna's instruction, right? So we have to determine, okay, what areas of my life am I not actually connecting the Shastra? I'm making decisions based on my conditioned nature instead of my constitutional nature as given by Sri Krishna. And so to bring that, and then the other side of that, so that's the negative side, seeing where there's a disconnect and then figuring out how to bring that in line. And the other side is identify where we are acting according to the Shastra, what areas of our life that we do make our decisions based on Shastra. And we have to fan that spark for further cultivation, right? So this is how we strengthen our divine side and gradually diminish our demoniac tendencies by identifying where those tendencies lie. Are they based in Shastra? Are they based on whim? Fan the spark of the ones that are based on Shastra, increase those, and the ones that are based on whim, gradually diminish those and bring it in line with Shastra. If we maintain these demoniac tendencies that we all have, as I mentioned, it's mixed, we are, like the demons mentioned in the purport to today's verse, who due to association with Sri Krishna in a previous life got the opportunity to be born as Brahmanas, we're misusing Brahminical culture and not taking advantage of utilizing the good opportunity we have in the form of Srila Prabhupada's instruction, right? So we're in this position, this unique situation where we have come in contact with Srila Prabhupada's movement. But that's not, I mean, it has the potential to be enough, but unless we actually act on it, it's not enough, right? In other words, it is enough, but for us, we have to actually act on it, act accordingly. We have to stop acting according to our whim and start acting according to Shastra. Otherwise, we will continue to maintain those demoniac tendencies, and we will fall into that category. So just because we actually came in contact with Srila Prabhupada's mission does not mean that we're taking full advantage of the precious gift that he's given us. If we're stagnant, then we're not going to grow. We have to constantly and consistently strive for spiritual advancement by understanding and applying Shastra in our lives under the direction of the Guru and following the example of other sadhus. So referring back to today's verse and what we've been talking about for the last few weeks, we have to learn from the mistakes of the partially trained, immature son of this Brahmana and not become falsely proud of our position, right? Not become falsely proud that, okay, I've become connected to Srila Prabhupada's mission. I am now acting in the right way. I was previously acting incorrectly, but now I have this connection to Krishna, and so now I can, you know, judge others and instruct people to do like this and like that. But basing it all on our whim, I can make adjustments. I can explain it in this way, like that. We have to be careful and learn from those mistakes of Shringi to not fall into that trap. And so we have to properly follow the Shastra carefully so that we develop the divine qualities, which are listed in verses 1 through 3 of chapter 16. And we have to make sure that we're not falling into the demoniac, which is basically most of the rest of chapter 16. So the symptoms and the destination of each, both the divine and the demonic, is made clear in those verses and purports to chapter 16. So it's in our best interest to be diligent in following the process strictly so that we can end our perpetual suffering in samsara, and of course, more importantly, to resume our eternal loving pastimes with Sri Krishna. Because it's not our goal to get out of the material world because it's miserable. Our goal is to return to our constitutional nature. We're eternal spirit souls. We're in a temporary place. The goal isn't to get out of the temporary place, it's to return to the eternal place. So this is what the focus should be. So to conclude, we need to take the process very seriously. We need to scrutinize the Shastra under the guidance of our guru and in the association of the devotees, the sadhus, so that our thoughts, our words, and our actions are all in line with Krishna's desires, instead of being merely based on our own whims, according to our own personal desires. So this is the thrust of what's being presented in these verses. Just because we're in a situation that seems divine, doesn't mean we're actually acting in a divine way. We can very much be harboring demoniac tendencies and not even know it. So in order to weed that out, we have to be diligent in studying Shastra, following the orders of the Guru, the example of the sadhus, and gradually we can actually become proper devotees of the Supreme Lord. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions or comments or additions. If anyone wants to share any realizations, etc.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. Yeah, I like the last point you said, like, it seems like we are in divine nature following following all those devotional acts, but might not be. So we should be very diligent. Yeah, just repeating your words. Yes, thank you very much. If anyone has any questions or comments or realization, please unmute yourself.
Yes, Kalpesh Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada. Very nice class, going through all the different qualities, divine versus demonic. Yeah, after hearing all this, one of the feelings which I am having right now, that whatever you made as statements on this call, it makes sense for me that, okay, I am not there. And there is a lot to work in that direction. But at the same time, I had a parallel thought coming in my mind is, if all these qualities are not coming out right now, so if we choose one of the devotional service and we constantly keep ourselves engaged into that and start thinking about like how to do better in that devotional service, is that a way where this quality will slowly manifest in the character? is that and behavior of the Vaishnava which will be displayed, is that a right thinking? Yeah.
Yes, these qualities automatically become established in those who are practicing, because currently we're acting according to our conditioned nature, so we don't have these qualities. When we start acting according to our constitutional nature, we start seeing things actually as they are, not as we see them. And when we start seeing things as they are, we start behaving properly. So then these qualities just automatically become manifest. So if we read through Srila Prabhupada's purport of that list of qualities in verses 1 through 3, he gives very detailed explanations of what they mean. Generally, when we hear these words, we give like a 2 or 3 word definition of them, and we think that, oh yeah, that's like nonviolence, that means like this. But Srila Prabhupada, he'll always bring it to the next level and bring it to, when Srila Prabhupada talks about nonviolence, and I bring this example up often, is he doesn't talk about just not hurting others or being vegetarian. Even he talks about, if you have something valuable, Krishna consciousness, and you're not giving it to others, you're committing violence. So he brings it in context so we can actually understand what is truly violence, what is truly nonviolence. So automatically, if we're actually becoming Krishna conscious and we're following the Shastra, these qualities will be manifest within us. And so the focus should be on cultivating our bhakti. But the litmus test to see if we are actually properly engaged in bhakti is if these qualities are manifesting. It's not that we should see, oh, okay, these are the qualities of the devotees, therefore I should develop these qualities externally at least, right? So people think I'm a devotee. We don't do it that way. That's not the proper way. We don't go to self-help gurus and find out how to become more humble or more tolerant of these things. No, we engage in Krishna service so that naturally we will become more humble and more tolerant, right? Because when we actually realize our sambandha, our relationship between us and the Supreme Lord, we automatically become humble because he's the infinite whole and we're an infinitesimal part, right? So what other choice is there but to be humble, right? And as far as tolerance goes, is Krishna is infinitely tolerant. We've turned our back on him to come to this material world, and we're ignoring him at every step of the way, even though there's nothing but him around. Everything that we're using to forget him is actually just a part of him. So he's so tolerant, right? And so when we see his tolerance of how much he tolerates on our behalf, then we also become tolerant to other living entities. We see that, despite all of our best efforts to give them transcendental knowledge to preach, they're still making wrong decisions. We're also automatically tolerant because we know that we've also made those same bad decisions over and over and over again in our lives. And so all of these qualities automatically come when one is properly engaging in bhakti. So we use those lists as a litmus test to see if these qualities are naturally growing within us, and we also use them to see exactly what these terms actually mean, right? So when Srila Prabhupada was going through and he said austerity, and he said it's absolutely necessary, because if you're not engaged in austerity, in other words, if you're not stepping out of your conditioned comfort zone and acting according to the Shastra, then what are the chances that you're actually going to make spiritual advancement? You're just acting according to your own whim. That's not going to make spiritual advancement. That's demonic, right? And so that's what was being pointed out when he said satyam, that you don't distort the truth for some personal interest. In other words, you don't read the Vedas and according to your own whim, you give some interpretation of it, and you give it a very popular twist that people will, hey, yeah, that sounds good. I can follow that, right? But if it's not in line with the authority, the previous acharyas, then it's actually, we're engaging in demoniac behavior, not divine. So we have to, tadvini pranipatena paripashyana seva. Yeah, we have to approach the spiritual man, those who have actually seen the truth. We have to approach them because we are also interested in seeing the truth. And we have to do it in such a way where, we have to be humble, we have to be submissive, and we also have to be willing to repay for that precious gift they're giving us. We have to be able to repay that with service to them, right? So all of these things are very important. So when we read through these, so, you can read through the qualities, but then read through what the qualities actually mean. And then you'll see that if we just focus on bhakti, then automatically these qualities will become manifest. Is that good, Kalpesh Prabhu?
And one more thing which came sometime, knowing like we are going through these qualities and we understand, then we have a judgment in our mind, right and wrong. But let's say we are keeping those only in mind, those faults, in the mind, but we are not expressing in the words or in our action, but we keep in our mind those faults of looking at others, taking that. Would that be a demonic quality?
If we have these faults in our mind, you're saying?
It is just in the mind, but it is not really, we are not speaking about it. We are not trying to, or sometimes we let it go, when you say, okay, you see that and you just let it go, kind of, okay, it's okay.
Right. So ideally our thoughts, words, and actions all have to be in line with Shastra. And so as long as we understand that our thoughts, when we're making those particular judgments, are not in line with Shastra, and we're trying to bring them in line with Shastra, then that means we're in good shape. Thinking with disconnect from Shastra, sorry, I have to go inside because my battery is dying. That is demonic. But if we recognize that and target that for destruction, then we can bring it into line. So it's not that we should become disheartened when we find ourselves with these thoughts, but we should understand that eventually we have to bring those thoughts in line with Shastra. All right. So it's not as bad as actually acting on it, but it's still bad. And so eventually we have to bring all of that in line with Shastra, not just our actions, but our thoughts and our words.
And often I get confused when, let's say, if something is in the mind, but we are not speaking about it, we are not doing any action on it. But then I get confused with another thing is that is called thinking, feeling, and willing. This thing, in that process. So if it is something is sitting in our mind, would get converted into our feelings, and then we'll will it for it? I mean, maybe we are not acting it immediately, but let's say, just making hypothetical situation. We had some resentment or enviousness for a person. Maybe the event happened in January of this year. We had that in our memory, but we because we are learning the shastras, so we try to say, okay, let's forget it,
Mm-hmm.
But when then it comes back into another event, and then we will just spit out those things, in the reaction part of it, in the month of May, this May. So it is sitting in our mind. Even though we are saying that we have forgotten that, but we have not.
Yes. Yeah, we should. Yeah. Go ahead.
Feeling and willing, those are the three things, what we will have in our mind, even though we are not saying it out immediately right now, but it is there. Sometimes people popularly say, if you don't do anger, then you are just trying to control that anger, but after a month you will come out like a volcano.
Yes.
I have seen that, many times people would do that, but that is where the struggle is, like if it is in the mind, can it convert, can it go away completely?
So the best thing, because we see that the cause of fall down starts with contemplation. So the thing is, if we have these thoughts, just like you're familiar with Palgo Vairagya, if you have an attachment and you try to give it up prematurely before you actually understand why you need to give it up, you still have an attachment for it. So if I'm attached to smoking, right, but I'm told, hey, you shouldn't smoke. It's bad for you. It's against the regular principle. And I give it up, but I still am thinking about it. I haven't really given it up. It's still there.
Mhm.
So in a very similar way, if we have this negative thought and we know we're not supposed to think it, we're holding some enmity towards someone. Just to push it aside and try to ignore it, it's not going to do the trick because it's still going to be there. What we have to be able to do is learn how through Shastra to understand that particular thing, right? So in most cases, we feel something about someone because of something they did, and we think it's wrong, right? And generally, when we see that in someone else, it usually means that that fault exists also within us to some degree, and that's why it bothers us so much, right? So if we try to internalize that and see, okay, why is Krishna pointing out this particular flaw, right? In someone else, but why is this being brought to my attention? Why does it bother me so much? And if we deal with that within ourselves, that's one way. Another way is to also see that we all have so many other faults, even if it's not the same one that we're resenting someone else for. And the way that Krishna deals with that is he lets us gradually become purified of that, right? He doesn't cut us off. He lets us gradually become purified from that, and there's always room for growth. So if we can understand it in the mature way according to Shastra, then we're not just trying to forget it because we know that if we dwell on it, it'll be bad. But if we don't bring it in line with Shastra, we are dwelling on it just on a lower level. And then, as you said, it'll come, months later, it'll come back, and I always knew that, blah, blah, blah. So we have to be able to see these things properly. And sometimes, sometimes there are behaviors that just shouldn't be done if we observe in a person. And so if we're their authority, then we can work on trying to correct that behavior. If we're not, then we can go to their authority and find out if our perception is right. Maybe there's something that's going on. So, but we shouldn't falsely try to give anything up. But we have to understand through Shastra how we are to see it properly. And then once we see it properly, we automatically let it go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. I don't see any more hands or unmutings. Oh, yeah. Okay. So thank you all for joining today. Please forgive any mistakes I may have committed in my entire life. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Panchakalpatrubhyas chakrabhas sindhuvyeva chapritanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Wonderful class. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.